Hi everyone! So as I promised at the end of my previous video, I'm going to talk about constructivism, rehabilitative justice, and transhumanism. It's mainly going to be about constructivism, but there'll also be an in-depth argumentation for rehabilitative justice and restorative justice as well as a summary introduction to transhumanism, an idea which I will obviously thorough in later videos. This took me quite a while to write all of this, as you could guess from how much time has passed between this video's upload date and the previous ones. So I think that from now on I'll do some micro videos between bigger ones, in order to avoid long periods like those, and to talk about much lighter subjects sometimes, or to throw some stuff that I presented in a much quicker way in this video, like in another video, sorry, or to simply correct myself from time to time. Anyway, I hope you will appreciate the effort I put in this video. Sorry for the long upload date, period and stuff. Anyway, so recently I took a polity skills test for the N+1th time, and it got me thinking, what even are constructivism and essentialism? I sort of had an idea, but I was baffled by how small the actual literature on the subjects were, or rather as they were seemingly defined within the context of the test. At least essentialism had a bit more substance to work on, so I'm gonna start by explaining how I'm guessing essentialism is defined within this context, and I'll attempt to explain my interpretation of the form of constructivism as it's defined here, Okay, so I'm used to constructivism meaning different things, depending on whether you're talking about philosophy, sociology, mathematical logic, etc., etc. And it wouldn't be the first idea that even within philosophy just itself, we'll have multiple definitions depending on the author. Like, for example, I don't know, the dialectical stuff like that, So, just to be clear, I have no authority on anything I'm about to say in this section, nor in any section, really. But just as anyone, I can still talk about my interpretations of essentialism and constructivism here, without invalidating the other uses of both words. Thanks for your understanding. Anyway, let's start. So, essentialism can be best described in this context again as the idea that we can prescribe what I will refer to as essences, which are abstract or arbitrary traits issued not to be subject to change that we infer onto individuals, and that we can we can possibly derive a person's intelligence, behavior, emotional response, position in the class hierarchy, and so on and so forth, or at least some of these, using one or combinations of them. So to explain what I mean by abstract or arbitrary, I do not intend them as tags, obviously. So by abstract characteristics, I'm talking about ideals which try to mimic real things, or sometimes mishmash so many sorts of things, which can just as well be arbitrary abstract themselves, to the point that these things these are based on, or way too distant to be relevant sometimes, while not being real in and of themselves, obviously. So, for example, a circle is an abstraction of the circular shapes one may try to draw on a sheet of paper. But a real circle can never truly be drawn, or at least not with infinite precision, which is a bit required, It can only be bounded by the thickness of the drawing tool. An arbitrary characteristic, however, attempts not to polish a reality, and rather to describe one, but of which one can never be really defined with a rigid definition. So, for example, a sand pile, is an example of an arbitrary concept. One cannot tell what a sand pile must or should be, nor can anyone define a proper threshold of how many grains of sand there must be, nor how far each grain can be from the next for a collection of grains of sand to be called a sand pile, right? So, in conclusion, abstractions try to modelize the real, whereas arbitrarities only content themselves to describe things as they are observed, left out of their definition. So, for example, astrology is a form of essentialism. Here, for example, astrological signs or abstract traits, as they mishmash a bunch of other abstract and arbitrary stuff, such as notably constellations and birth dates, and trying to infer through what's called a horoscope, stuff like how one's day will go according to their astrological sign. Another example, although much more harmful, is racism, and more precisely white supremacy, or any of its newer codenames such as race realism or whatever. Can be hard to find out whether a race is abstract or arbitrary without much context, as one could argue that races are abstractions of skin color and geographical origins, among other things. But we could just as well say that one's race cannot be clear-cut determined either, or that one's race is not something for anyone to decide, and that it somehow transcends human definitions as some sort of mystical thing. That's the whole esotericism shenanigans. But in practice, well, obviously, white supremacists tend to blow hot and cold on these parts, which, granted, is something that most essentialists of any kind tend to do. Either way, white supremacists still infer that race invariably dictates your propensity to crime, divorce, and a bunch of other things, sometimes dropping some of it when it's favorable, Constructivism, on the other hand, is characterized within this context to be a way to question essentialist ideas rationally, usually resulting in debunks or by putting these presumed realities, quote-unquote, back to their places, not merely as realities like for real, but as constructs, artifacts of social interactions and propagandistic domination by those in power throughout history sometimes. Obviously, I'd like to address a common misconception, which is the idea that constructs don't have any meaning whatsoever or don't exist or whatever. Sure, constructs are hypothetical objects whose phenomenal existence only depends upon a subject's mind, which is basically the definition, right? But sure, they don't exist materially or of any worth in the absence of anyone's mind to use them, but they still do exist in people's minds nonetheless, right? This is a very complicated philosophical mess, and clearly I'm not cognizant enough on this matter to really talk about it, but so, I won't be getting into much details here, but feel free to further your own research on this kind of stuff if you wish. The main criticisms of essentialism we can point out as a constructivist, are the following. Most essences are either too abstract to explain the real world accurately without any exception, or too arbitrary to be meaningfully used in order to reason any causation whatsoever, from the essence to the ways it's supposed to act on the individual, right? So, also, arbitrary traits are rarely arbitrarities, right? Secondly, ever so often, what are viewed as essences tend to actually be subject to change, which is rendered evident as one takes even the slightest bite at studies of fields such as anthropology, social sciences, archaeology, and so on and so forth. And finally, in practice, essentialists have to deal with those violations of the principle of non-contradiction, right? By blowing hot and cold on so many aspects of their belief that their belief is literally rendered too incoherent and unintelligible to be in any way, shape, or form relevant to academic discussion or just overall discussion, right? So in this small part, I will try to summarize this essentialism versus constructivism thing using a scale of how essentialist, or in a way at least essentialish parts of argumentations can be, which, to be honest, I'll also use as a vessel for further development on my criticisms toward essentialism. Basically, we can see essentialism and constructivism as polar opposites to one another, but it doesn't mean that they're on steps that guide one's thought one way or the other. Argumentatively, an essentialist can, just like a constructivist, can use implications that vary on the scale of how essentialist they are. But how can we tell how essentialist a given implication or explanation between two observations actually is? Well, there are two main kinds of observations we could do. The first one are observations on perceived realities, like raw observations in a way, which, if anything, have yet to be modelized by the argumentator in order to actually rationally use them in an argument. Keep that in mind, by the way, it's going to be really important. The second one are observations on modelizations of reality, or combinations of them to form abstract objects, which we call constructs. So basically we have real observations, quote unquote, and construct observations, or modelizations and stuff like that, Now we can see there are four ways they can interact with each other in the form of one explaining the other. Now I attempt to scale all four of these interactions on a scale from 4 to 1 of how essentialist they are, the fourth being the least essentialist, whereas the first is the most fundamental one to essentialist argumentation. So fourth degree essentialism is an observation on a construct which is explained by an observation on another construct or on itself. So the implies symbol here symbolizes explanation rather than than implication, but you can see it as implication as well. You can't get any more argumentatively constructivist than that, truly, and I don't think I need to explain why. Third degree essentialism is an observation on a construct which is displayed by an observation on perceived reality. So reality, like quote unquote reality, implies construct. This is just modelization or abstraction. I did say that essentialism uses abstractions, but it's not actually something that is reserved to them, like at all. In fact, scientists use abstractions all the time in order to modelize the world as accurately as possible based on the real, or based on real, or perceived as real at least, observations. Unlike fourth degree, however, this third degree lends itself a little better with essentialist argumentation, or is at least a bit more characteristic, which explains this place, and which will be further explained, I guess, like implicitly, as we get closer to the first degree on the scale. Second degree is an observation on reality, which is explained by an observation on another reality or on itself. So basically, reality implies reality. All of these, obviously, quote unquote. This is what we called a arbitrarity earlier, and I named it as such for a reason, as this makes no rational sense argumentatively speaking, as these kind of raw observations on reality cannot be used to reason onto. We have to modelize them, or at least the one of which we want to explain the observation we've made on it, in order to even hope for a rational implication between the two. It often comes up when someone confuses correlation for causation, which is a common mistake, I'll give you that. Although, even if their modelizations do make a case for the exact same explanation, but with the models instead of the observed realities themselves, it still isn't rational to say that one can explain the other, as you actually base yourself on modelizations without even acknowledging them, which is a simple mistake at best, or intellectually dishonest at worst. And finally, first degree essentialism, the last one, obviously being an observation on the reality, which is explained somehow by an observation on the construct. So basically, a construct implies a reality, quote unquote. This is the most ridiculous one so far, yeah? And yet, it's the most fundamental one to essentialism on the list. If you spot this in an argument, please just sigh, turn around, and work your way out. Whereas for second degree, it's at least maybe possible to get to the right conclusion, right? Although for the bad region, there is literally no way a man-made construct can actually impact reality, or at least not in this way, like not a phenomenal, like subject's mind kind of construct, right? I mean, it can obviously impact actions and stuff like that, but it cannot impact reality in and of themselves, right? And yet, essentialists use these kind of first-degree essentialism all the fucking time, whether it be using your astrological sign to explain why you're so angry today, or checking your ethnicity to explain why you are apparently more prone to crime, as if it's some of your DNA or some bullshit like that. These are the most irrational arguments one could ever do, and yet they form the most, like, the basis of most fundamental parts of essentialist argumentation, which hopefully should kind of tell you something about it. So yeah, as well, obviously what we call real here is inherently subject to the person's judgment and knowledge. So we can't really spot essentialist argumentation just by how the person phrases their stuff, right? So after all, imagine, would you prefer saying the sky-color spectrum spans across 450 up to 485 nanometers, or that the sky is blue? Which one do you prefer, right? Moreover, does it even tell you how you arrived? Does it even tell how you arrived to that conclusion? As well, is it just a banality, or is it just used within an actual debate? What I mean is, we can't call things essentialist just by how, like, the phrasing, you know? The individual corpus of knowledge actually matters significantly here. And we need to ask more thorough stuff in order to determine the solidity of their corpus knowledge, on the corpus of knowledge they have on the matter, as well as their argumentation, obviously. Even then, we have to dissociate explanations from remarks having basically no value whatsoever on their own anyway. But well, constructivism shouldn't just be about essentialism hunting anyway. It's also a way to arrive at ideas more rationally, and now I'm going to talk about just how I try to be constructivist, and hopefully that will help you as well. So, what alternatives could constructivism, or at least this specific meaning of the word, provide? Well, we can at least give one answer, which is in fact pretty simple. In case you don't know how to explain a phenomenon, try to base yourself as much as possible on already well-known data and tools, I mean at least what you know about, or relevant fields considered with maybe social sciences, biology, physics, whatever, so that it makes the question less tedious to research and answer to. But it also allows us to lean our answers towards a pretty powerful scientific methodological tool, which we call Occam's razor. So basically, it's the idea that, for the lack of a better word, simpler, quote unquote simpler solutions are probably closer to the truth. It's often a bit misunderstood, obviously, though. It doesn't mean that the preferred solution has to really be easier to understand, but instead, it has to rely on as few baseless hypotheses as possible. So basically, if you need to just rely on the model of atoms and quarks, for example, then it basically passes Occam's razor, right? As these are well documented, well researched, reliable stuff, and that a direct implication from a well-known thing is one of the simplest of all solutions. And as long as there is no fallacy involved, obviously, it shall be the preferred hypothesis according to Occam. So here's basically how I would explain this. Imagine you have a specific phenomenon that two people are discussing on how to explain. Person 1 proposes a explanation A, whereas person 2 gives an explanation B. As you determine them sources for their claims, person 1 gives you papers P1 and P2, whereas person 2 gives you just one paper, P3. Already, just to see if you'll follow, since person 2 gave less material than person 1, does 𝗖𝗚𝗡 tell you that person 1 already has an advantage? The answer is no, or at least not forcefully. The number of sources doesn't really count for 𝗖𝗚𝗡, as it only acts on their next step, which is what they'll answer once we ask them which reasoning led them to their explanation using these sources. So consider these chains of implication for each explanation. So by 𝗖𝗚𝗡, which one should be preferred? Well, one will be tempted to say explanation B, since it has a much more straightforward reasoning. It's not forcefully the case. One thing we tend to forget about, but which is essential to correctly apply 𝗖𝗚𝗡 here, is all the assumptions which are made within each reasoning. Reasoning 1, 2, and 3, and all of the gluing implications could be properly valid and in accordance with well-known data that person 1 is aware of, and may have been attested within P1 and P2, and the few hidden assumptions which are made could be negligible or derived from common school knowledge, for example, rendering the implication chain basically equivalent to a direct implication from both papers and basic school knowledge, a bit like this, you know? As for person 2, on the other hand, maybe the basic reasoning is actually filled with hidden flawed assumptions, rendering the arguments to be more of a non sequitur than anything. A non sequitur being a fallacious argument in which the final statement isn't derived from any of the assumptions. Hence the name, which itself could be hastily translated from Latin as doesn't follow. This is different from assuming school knowledge, which, well, if we assume that the first person actually listened to the classes, which granted is quite an assumption, well, this person then would have actually learned this kind of knowledge, even if it was just to pass their exams at first. Of course, no one's perfect, right? So there'll always be a few baseless assumptions, but we can try to make them as negligible as possible. Day-to-day problems often can't be solved with formal logic, after all. So basically, the idea of 𝗖𝗚𝗡's razor is that the reasoning with the least degree of non-sequiturity is to be preferred out of all. Sure, maybe explanation A is completely wrong, and B may be completely right, but if person 2 gives weaker arguments for B than person 1 does for A, then it's still rational for it's still rational for person 2 to believe their explanation B based on their own reasoning. And I insist on the based on their reasoning, right? Like on this part at least, because it could simply be fixed as such. Use more data, more scientific methodology, and more actual logic, which can be learned through a bit of education. It doesn't have to be like university kind of education, like you don't have to go in depth for that kind of shit, you know? You could just ask on the internet or to people in your comments, for example, which is part of why anarchism will probably make it even better. See of my first 2 videos. But yeah, it doesn't mean that you should come in completely free of any prior assumptions. And in fact, there's a school of thought that's getting more and more traction within the statistician community nowadays, which is called Bayesianism, which I'm going to explain in a bit. So, but still, to summarize, 𝗖𝗚𝗡's razor just means that we should, take the explanation which has the fewest counts of baseless, non-sequitur assumptions, which are obvious enough to be spotted, at least. Okay, so remember when I briefly mentioned Bayesianism literally seconds ago? Okay, I'm gonna try to explain it. But, so it's not in the script, but 3 Blue and Brown did a fucking gorgeous video on the subject, so I urge you to actually watch this video first, and then you can come back here, but like, I can't explain it as good as he does. I'm just gonna try to, trivialize a little bit of the kind of thing to show that it has applications like on a daily basis in a way. But really watched 𝗤𝗡𝗡𝗡𝗏's video. Okay, so where was I? So basically, there's that formula that we call base formula. It goes like this. Yeah, I know, this looks bad, I know, you maths, am I right, lads? But yeah, anyway, I'm still gonna try to explain it, and explain why the fuck it's important, actually, rather. So in most scientific papers, you have two hypotheses being tested concurrently. Usually one of which is called the null hypothesis. So basically, like, you do like predictions and stuff like that, like you modelize a null hypothesis, like as if there was nothing going on, and usually you get a normal distribution, a bit like that. So yeah, that's how you usually do it. And basically, so this means that there is nothing going on in particular, like there is no correlation, no effect, whatever. And generally, what articles are going to compute to reach the null hypothesis is the p-value, as you can see here, you know. So basically, the p-value is the probability of getting the data that we got in the paper according to the null hypothesis modelization which we had. So, in terms of like mathematical notation, we usually write it as such. So we have probability of the data that we get, so basically where we get the observations, basically, according to the null hypothesis, which is the hypothesis modelized by this bell curve here. So this quantity is usually called p-value, as I said, and it represents the plausibility of the null hypothesis. Hence, the closer to zero it is, so basically the further right, or instead of the further left, you get your observations compared to the mean of the curve, the less plausible the null hypothesis is. Hence, so usually the null hypothesis is rejected when the p-value is inferior to 5%. But it mainly depends on which field of study the paper is classified in, and on how strict the journal is with the results. Okay, but that's not actually what we really want. What we want is the probability of the alternate hypothesis according to the data in the paper. So basically almost the inverse. So we want that, but not only that, but the inverse hypothesis. So basically 1 minus that. So actually, obviously, fortunately, we can use the p-value to get to this thing, you know, because we can do some equation solving, as you can see here, and we get that the probability of the anti-null hypothesis here is, according to the data, is equal to this, right? So there are a few problems here, though. Mainly this quantity. So this quantity is, as well as as well as this quantity, all both inherently very, very subjective, or at least very subject to prior calculations and stuff like that. Because these are the a priori, like the prior probabilities, as you can see in the 𝗤𝗡𝗡𝗏 video, of both the hypothesis, like the anti-null hypothesis, like without any data whatsoever, just the probability that it is right. all of this over like P of D, which is the probability of the data being right according to, well, not any hypothesis whatsoever. So obviously these are like practically possible to calculate. Like at least we can we can notice that p of d is always greater than the p-value, but that's basically it, right? I mean, so obviously there are a lot of limitations of presenting the Bayes formula just in this very formal way. As you can see that there are things that we can't recompute if we don't have any intuition whatsoever about what they mean. So in fact, obviously, unfortunately, Bayesianism can actually be applied to very trivial situations. It kind of generalizes the idea of Occam's razor, in fact. To illustrate this, I'm going to use the experiment that Christophe Michel from the YouTube channel 𝗢𝗞𝗘𝗏 proposed to picture that whole thing out. I'm going to twist it a little bit to add a bit more spice, but the other whole idea remains. Okay. So, imagine you're with your friends and you're playing a tabletop role-playing game with a DM and all sorts of shit like that. And one of the rules of the game is that you can, after each level up, ask the DM for a question for you to answer. And answering it correctly means that the DM must give you an object, and the goal of the game is to collect as many objects as possible within the remaining time. There are many questions that the DM could give you, but there aren't all that many, so one could easily learn each of them. However, the answers are always subject to change depending on how the game goes. So one such question is based on a rule that the DM must follow until they give that exact question, and which that they can't give before they have rolled at least 5 dice. And it goes like this. Since the beginning of the game, the DM has used the very same dice every single time. They could have chosen a d4, a d6, a d8, a d12, or d20. The question is, which is it? So, the deal here is, how do you make a strategy to know which dice does the DM roll since the beginning of the game? Well, we can use Bayesian probability to make the least riskful bet, and you'll see that it's not that alienish. It's actually pretty intuitive. Or somewhat. I mean, it's complicated to explain, but that's basically math, right? I mean, math are always very simple concepts, but overly complicated formalization. So, anyway, at first, the DM, before the DM even rolled any dice, and this is not the right diagram, obviously I'm stupid. So before, the DM rolls even any dice, there's one chance per 5 that they could have chosen a d4, a d6, a d8, or d12, or d20. The DM rolls the first dice, and the result is 7. At this very point, you can already cross out the d4 and d6, right? As neither of them have at least 7 faces. The remaining possibilities are a d8, a d12, or a d20. The likelihood to get a 7 on a d8 is 12.5%, around that, so basically 1/8. With a d12, it's going to be 1/12, so approximately 8.3. And on a d20, it's going to be, 1/20th, obviously. So if we normalize each value, so basically that means that we multiply all of these, so 12.4, 8.4, and 5%, by a certain amount, so that their sum equates 100%. So this process is called normalization, right? It's just really, so basically it means that you multiply all these things by what we call the Bayes factor, which is p P of the hypothesis, here it's P of which dice is it, over the P of getting the whole data. So basically, yeah. So basically, it's, like P of D is basically the sum of all of these products. Px, you know, like if you want, P of x is basically the sum of all the products of you know, Px according to whatever dice is like the hypothesis, times the probability of getting that dice. Okay. Hopefully this wasn't too bad. But yeah, anyway, so what this means is that now the chances that this could be a D8 go from, like, once normalized, you get not 12.5%, but 48.06% here apparently. On the other hand, if for the D12, it goes from 8.4 to 32.56 apparently, and for the D20 is gonna be 20% basically, right? So after, like, this is just like trying to normalize at 100%, right? I mean, hopefully everyone knows what it is. I'm just really bad at explaining. But yeah, if you have a problem with that kind of stuff, I'll maybe throw that in a later video, because I really didn't, you know, think about it enough. Okay, anyway, let's stop the torture. Okay, so now the obvious, the obvious first choice here is D8, because it's the one with the most which is the most likely. It's 48.06% here, and basically what you'll do, that when the DM rolls a second time, you're going to have to put this instead of the 20% here. Obviously all of these here are out, because, I mean, they're out of question, right? They don't have a seventh face, so we don't need them anymore. And basically, you get this data here, like right there. This is your new prior assumption, Asian value for the D8. The D12 becomes, like, it goes from 20% to 32%, 42.5 or whatever, and then you get your D20, and it becomes well, it stays basically at 20%. Honestly, this one isn't all that all that different, right? But yeah, and then so we do that again, and basically what we do is that we do the products of 48 and stuff like that. Like, basically, we now have all of this, and the second roll, according to the DM, is 3. So you do the process again, but without. So this time you don't have the D. You don't have the D4. You don't have the D6. You only have the D8, the D20, the D12, and the D20 with their new prior, basically, probabilities, that they're the correct ones, and you keep basically the probabilities that you get a 3 on each dice. So once again, it's gonna be 1/8 on the D8, 1/12 on the D12, and 1/20 on the D20. And now, basically, if we do the process of normalization again, we get that, so basically this and this, all this leads the D8 to be the most likely one at 61.68%. On the other hand, you're gonna get that the D12 is about 30% likely, and the D20 on the other hand is at a whopping 10% likelihood. Okay? Now, just do this a couple of times, and finally, when you reach level 2, the DM asks you the question, which dice did I use since the beginning of the game? Up to this moment, they did 13 rolls, and your stakes are basically 99.5% on the D8. So you go with the D8, and boom, you actually won. So, this is actually a very effective strategy, and the thing is, actually, if you did something like that, so basically, if you always made the D8 more and more likely as nothing was going above 8, then obviously you did a Bayesianism. Okay? That's just how, like, I did it with a lot of numbers and stuff like that, but basically that just means that you should put more importance to the most likely dice, basically, each time. So here, basically, like, we get a 3. Which one is the most important one? Like the one which is the more likely to get a 3? Well, it's gonna be the D8, right? The D12 is gonna be the second most likely, and the D20 is gonna be the least likely one. So, you know, you don't even need to compute all this. You just need to, like, sort of rearrange your basically your values in your head. You don't need to put exact values, but you know, that's just the overall idea, you know. And usually when you're doing like really quick stuff like that, you don't need that kind of you know, rigor or whatever. You just need to be like, okay, so which one is the more likely each time, and basically you put it more likely than last time, and then etc, etc. So it's basically sort of recursive kind of thing, and this is basically what Bayesianism is all about. I think the graphical representation was much more telling than the numbers. Hopefully. Like, you see the trends here, hopefully, and maybe you can see the intuition here. You don't even need to actually compute any of these by hand. At some point, it just becomes intuitive how the diagram goes. I also stole all that diagram thingy from 𝗬𝗓𝗏, obviously, so if you speak French, well, go check him out. It's really cool. And you see, you can actually, you can obviously do this kind of things with scientific papers, in fact, although they're much harder to read, so ideally, as a society, we should maybe make scientific methodology more mainstream through education and slipping methodological stuff into social interactions, making scientific methodology overall more intuitive and intelligible at the same time as time goes on. So scientific articles don't sound all that unintelligible anymore. That's kind of what I implied and basically stated in my first two videos. But in the meantime, just adjust how much you actually believe a hypothesis based on what each source says about it and how trustworthy they usually are. No need to do actual computations here, you know. It's just the basic idea. However, I'm still proposing A2, which does a sort of approximation of Bayesian inference. That's how it's called, basically, this process. On my website, if you want to check it out, it's not exact at all. It's just, you know, to get the overall idea, and I was really lazy to actually do the thing. But it's pretty good nonetheless, I think, to get how it kind of goes overall. I couldn't find the tool from Christophe Michel. If I find it, I'll just update the page basically, and I'll just relate it to Christophe Michel's thing. But yeah, that's that. So yeah, oh yeah, it's the my bad. It's the old thingy. So yeah. Anyway, so why is it called constructivism? Now, why is the term constructivism actually relevant here? Well, this is because I've actually inspired myself from social constructivism here, which itself arises itself from epistemological constructivism, which, well, these are a lot of words, I'll give you that. But basically the epistemological notion of constructivism states that knowledge is formed from constructs arising from social interactions, mainly between experts. Sure, this implies that truth can never truly be fully reached, but scientists, as well as people who study the history of science, which, if you agree that history is basically science, or also scientists, know fully well that the idea of scientific consensus being a sort of immutable thing is extremely inaccurate. However, the most rational thing to do is always to rely on prior assumptions. On prior knowledge, coming from reliable sources, whether it be from school or uni, scientific papers, really good journals who actually link their sources for once, an interview that someone, maybe even yourself, gave to an expert on the subject, etc., etc. So it's obviously that, it's obvious that one can never truly be free of bias, and every so often relying rationally on your prior knowledge may lead you to very, very wrong a prioris if you've only read any poorly written articles on the matter, which is why we require the use of scientific methodology to be able to filter out as much bias as possible somewhat rigorously. Although you could technically say that there will still be biases, but unfortunately I doubt these ones will ever be overcome, at least rationally. So anyway, now that all this shit is sorted out, why don't we try to apply some constructivism to a very much not polemical thing at all, such as, I don't know, abolishing the police in the carceral system, perhaps. The way we usually approach justice is as a set of institutions which exist for the sole function of enforcing the law. Such institutions notably include the police, tribunals, and prisons. But doesn't that feel a bit off? Shouldn't justice be about, fixing crime, helping victims with the traumas they could have gotten from the crimes they went through, preventing offenders from recidivizing and deterring people from committing crimes? How exactly does incarcerating offenders do any of that? One could argue that sending people to prison at least reassures the victims of the crimes being made, but that's a mediatic cliché. In fact, when the ISJ did what was basically the first ever national survey on crime victims' views on safety and justice, we can notably find out that by a 2-to-1 margin, victims prefer that the criminal justice focus more on rehabilitating people who commit crimes rather than punishing them. We can also notice that women are much more lenient than men. In fact, 66% of women crime victims think we should be more focused on rehabilitation, and only 25% of which think we should focus more on punishment. These numbers become 55% and 38% respectively for main crime victims. And that's despite the fact that 91% of all rape victims are women, and from all victims of violence, 88% 1% of women report suffering from PTSD due to the experience, which goes down to 35% for men victims. And that, although less serious situation violence or altercation was equal for both genders, more serious and violent abuse was perpetrated by men. And yeah, I know men are far more victim of homicides, for example. However, these homicides are more frequently committed by, well, other men. It therefore seems that men are way harsher with themselves, which kind of goes against their interest. That's kind of weird. Similar tendencies can be seen with black people being much more pro-rehab than white people. The rates of pro-rehab versus pro-punishment being basically the same as for women and men, respectively. And this despite the fact that black people are far more victims to crimes in proportion to their population than white people are. However, it is slightly more consistent since black people do commit more crimes than white people. There's even a very well-known far-right racist dog whistle to talk about that. But that begs the question, why are men so much more supportive for something that, actively and excessively restricts them than black people do then? Well, if I had to guess, women, as well as non-binary people, but we're never included in any of the studies, unfortunately, and black people both go through much more discrimination. And for both of these groups, the discriminations they face are not just individual sporadic mean words, Instead, they also face institutional systemic discriminations, whether it be sexism for women, racism for black people, Their lenience then derives from the empathy or sympathy, whatever, they might, develop towards incarcerated people, seeing their rights violated by the violent institution of prison, akin to how the institutions fucks them up themselves, through sexism or racism. White people, nor do men, face institutional discrimination for their race or gender, respectively. They could if they're gay, or working class, or intersex, etc., but that's not the subject here. As for violent crime victims in general, weirdly enough, 60% are pro-rehab, with 33% wanting that we should focus more on punishment. So overall, I would say that it's literally clear win for rehabilitation. As for the length of prison sentences, 61% of victims prefer shorter sentences and more spending on prevention, for only 25% wanting longer sentences. Overall, there's a lot of stuff to look at in this document, so if you want to read more, just look at the ASJ source in the description. So it seems as though victims tend to be more favorable to more rehabilitation, and lenience of each group is the lenience of each group is proportional to how much they face discrimination and crimes, as well as inversely proportional to criminality rates within the group. The latter factor is a bit surprising. In fact, if I was asked to find a relation a few years ago, I have guessed that lenience in each group was proportional to the ratio of criminality rates over victimhood rates, and certainly not the exact multiplicative inverse. And yet, evidence suggests otherwise to this guess I'd have made a few years ago, basing myself on the tones of crime investigation medias, and the frequent sadism in victims' testimonies or their families and friends, with recurring phrases such as "I don't think that sentence was enough" and the like. But here we go, I guess. Maybe the media isn't always right, and it sometimes pushes a pro-prison narrative. Who would have guessed? Oh, yeah.
𝗢𝗧𝗘𝗥 est une alternative à la prison. Pour la journée, les hommes peuvent vaquer à leur occupation, mais ils sont soumis à des règles de vie strictes. Le foyer leur impose un réveil matinal à 6h30, à l'issue duquel ils doivent remettre les clés de leur chambre. Les repas sont pris en commun et à heure fixe. L'extraction des cheveux a lieu à 23h. Dans ce lieu de vie, les hommes réapprennent le quotidien. Le ménage, les repas, la lessive sont réalisés collectivement.
So, in practice, rehabilitation is often an aspect of what we call restorative justice, which usually keeps the idea of separating the offender and the subjects of their offenses. But instead of the retributive idea that they should just rot in jail and getting their rights completely crushed as if criminals were somehow subhuman and unworthy of consideration, restorative justice uses the rehabilitative idea that we should actively push towards reducing recidivism from the offenders and helping them to reach this goal as effectively as possible through therapy and stuff like those. I think it's an okay transitionary system towards complete anarchism and anti-carceral system. Moreover, the purpose of the centers is to reduce recidivism, which, fortunately, rehabilitation is well known to be extremely effective with. Don't believe me? Well, here is a meta-analysis of 58 studies on the subject. As conclusions, out of all eligible studies, we find that inmates who participate in correctional education programs, so restorative programs basically, are 36% less likely to recidivate than others. In case you wonder, the p-value, which is the probability to obtain the other data in the study, imagining that these programs had no impact whatsoever, once again, is less than 5%, which is usually enough to discard the hypothesis that there is no impact whatsoever, which, as we've seen in the Bayesianism part, is called the null hypothesis. Everything is linked. But yeah, the 7 most rigorous studies in the bunch go as far as 43% less recidivism. Even the fucking US Department of Justice acknowledges the merits of rehabilitation in reducing the rates of recidivism, or at least they did back when they wrote that thing in 2017. So overall, rehab is a more humane and effective way to reducing recidivism, and it's important that we spend more rehabilitative programs than we do with prisons, as well as forming people to handle these crimes in a rehabilitative manner. But you know what? I think we should go even further and get into the messy lens of crime prevention, just because just focusing on fixing crimes is absolutely not enough. And preventing crimes limits the necessity to use these centers and avoids people being judged for crimes, since less people are doing crimes. So I think rehabilitative justice should also encompass crime prevention, in order to use restorative centers as little as possible. Currently, we know there are a lot of factors which influence criminality rates. However, it's a bit unclear as to which factors are the most prominent. However, one factor which is very, very well researched is poverty. For this one, I think there are way too many sources I could give. So I'm just gonna show you the source library links instead. So one big thing we need to do to work on is to reduce poverty as much as possible, obviously. I'll probably give ways to reduce poverty in future micro videos, as I said, but for now I'm going to focus a little bit on a very much non-controversial to deal with this. Yeah. So, what I never really understood is the idea of non-violent crimes. Like, what the fuck does that? Like, what even is the fucking purpose of punishing something that doesn't even harm anyone. And to take an example, the war on drugs is such a fucking problem. According to a study from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, branching from the US Department of Justice, them again, 52% of all federally sentenced offenders in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, with linked US Sentencing Commission reports, by primary offense category in the fiscal year end of 2012, were sentenced for drug offenses. 99% of which, 99.8%, of which were sentenced for drug trafficking. Literally, violent offenses, including sexual offenses, constitute only 10.4% of the prison population in comparison. Also, don't ask me why they excluded sexual offenses from violent offenses in the original table. Literally, fuck knows why. They could have put sexual offenses and non-sexual offenses into the violent crimes percentage, but well, whatever, I guess. But guess who's always there to enforce the law and all of these crimes, or rather, these non-crimes? Yeah, exactly, the fucking police. But hey, if that's all that there was to it, why would you give a shit? Obviously, there is way more to it, as you guessed. In fact, I'd argue that not only do we not need them, but they're also a very unfit institution to deal with criminality. In fact, these restoration centers are in and of themselves alternatives to a central policing institution. It is indeed quite foolish to think that we could form people to deal with ever so many various crimes, expecting them to do the job correctly. It's like trying to make people learn group theory, phonotactics, string theory, rocket science, and what the fuck even all Manus Leibniz to a single person within the span of 4 months. Actually, it's quite worse than that. And yet, cops are only trained for 3 or 4 months in the US and are somehow expected to do the job correctly, which is fucking ludicrous. It's funny though that police brutality is inversely proportional to how long it takes for cops to be fully trained, depending on the country. So here for example, in France, they're initially trained for 4 months as well, but they still have to be formed for 12 months in total in order to get over student grade and become trainee policemen. They still need another year to become actual policemen. So effectively, most policemen are trained for a whole 2 years. According to a street press investigation, 48 people died in total following the police intervention in France between 2007 and 2017, which effectively means around 4 or 5 people per year, which is already quite big. However, according to mapping police violence, around 1,098 people were killed by the police in 2019 alone. If we take this in consideration, if we take in consideration the populations of both countries between the ratios of people dead from police intervention in 2019 for the US and between 2007 and 2017 over the population of each country, basically the US is still 4.36 times more fucked up than France is. As if we weren't fucked up enough, but anyway. And moreover, policemen's biases actually feed themselves. Indeed, cops will likely patrol places where they have patrolled more in order to limit the risks of missing any crimes in the area, as well as to maximize the chances to find crimes in there. So imagine we had two populations, right? Population A and population B. But imagine that cops had a slight bias for one population in particular. So let's say they patrol areas with more population A, let's say 55% of the time, and the other population, so B, only 45% of the time. Well, let me put you an extract of another video to show you the mess.
Et là, je vais simuler l'algorithme de 𝗍𝗘𝗏 qui va envoyer les policiers là où le risque est le plus important, sans tenir compte de la couleur de peau. Et je te parie, Cyrus, que ce petit biais, il va disparaître et qu'on va revenir à 50-50. Attention, regarde bien ce qui va se passer. Boum, maintenant. Attends, qu'est-ce qui se passe là?
Voilà, ils sont racistes.
Non mais attends, ils sont pas racistes là, c'est un programme informatique. Il
Si.
doit y avoir un bug.
Non, c'est du racisme anti-bleu. C'est tout.
Ouais, en fait, t'as raison. Au lieu de corriger le biais, l'algorithme de 𝗍𝗘𝗏 l'a amplifié. Regarde, je t'explique. Le truc, c'est qu'on a une sorte de cercle vicieux qui s'est mis en place. Plus on envoie des policiers dans un quartier, plus les chances de détecter des crimes dans ce quartier seront importantes. Du coup, comme il y a un tout petit peu plus de policiers chez les bleus au début, le programme enregistre plus de crimes chez les bleus, alors qu'en fait, c'est juste qu'ils ont été un peu plus observés que les verts. On appelle ça un biais d'échantillonnage. Du coup, on envoie encore plus de policiers chez les bleus, ça amplifie le biais, et ainsi de suite. Et dans la vraie vie, vous l'avez compris, ceux qui sont victimes de cette discrimination, ils n'ont pas la peau bleue, mais plutôt la peau foncée.
So overall, let me just put the music back a little bit. Here we go. Okay, so overall, we could expect that policy's racism only feeds itself all the time, heavily impacting the recorded criminality rates. This happens for black people in the US, in France too, obviously, but that also happens here in what we call HLMs, which we could translate as low-rent housing. In other words, the police cannot be trusted to arrest people fairly, even if they had just a slight bias to begin with. And believe me, it's not that slight in real life. So an obvious alternative is train different people to handle different situations based on what they prefer to learn about. Duh! Like, instead, just propose a more choice-based education, each choice being being for a single kind of situation to deal with, so that you can't get so that you can get as much into all the details of handling each situation as possible. But it's ludicrous to think that people can be experts of handling so many different situations, such as dealing with murders, rapes, drug traffickers, cult leaders, fights, panic attacks, etc. But also I'd argue that none of these things are actually the reason the police even exists. The police as an institution only has two goals: protect the state and protect private property. Do you really think they would actually give a shit about homeless people calling them after they've been beaten up by a bunch of fascist skinheads? Of course they won't. Unless, well, of course. I mean, unless if that's mediatized, in that case, you can bet they're gonna give them a fucking Medal of Honor or something. No wonder homeless people tend to show less trust for the police than for paramedics. So, but yeah, overall, they couldn't even sustain, okay. But yeah, overall, they couldn't even sustain as an institution in a anarchist system, since there is no state or privatized property to protect. But even now, they should be dismantled a fortiori of defending them and funding research, rehabilitation programs and restoration centers instead, so that they just vanish as their influence and trustworthiness shrinks ever so smaller for the general population. This will definitely weaken the state though, so let's not delude ourselves imagining reforms will get us even close to there. There needs to be a genuine systemic change to our relations to the state and private property. In other words, we need to reach a truly communist society. Once again, watch my first video to see my take on the subject before commenting anything about communism will never work or monarchism is too utopian or some bullshit like that. And yeah, I know, I hear you typing psychophobic shit about mentally ill murderers and psychopaths and blah blah blah. But the thing is, the system doesn't know how to deal with them either, you know? I mean, there are psychiatric centers who can deal with them, right? And I think that psychiatric care is a fascinating subject, and being such a science or field of medicine and stuff, which its reputation is kind of tarnished because of the forced internship of patients. I think I'll do a video on this subject to explain how I think we could make psychiatric care as accessible and as comprehensive for patients as possible. I'm just letting a little thing about the subject here, as well as the current trends on the matter, you know. However, that's not even remotely related to prisons or police, although it's slightly more related to rehabilitation in a way, but it's way more general than reintegration of criminals. So I don't think, I don't feel like covering the subject in this video. Some edgy right-wingers could propose death penalty, but it's a terrible alternative to rehabilitation, really. First off, it's far from being a deterrent in any way, shape, or form. In fact, as of 2008, 67 lead criminologists were interviewed on the matters, and 88% of which responded that executions do not lower homicide rates, and that, we actually find out that as of 2017, out of 25 states with the highest murder rates, 20 of them had death penalty, and out of the 25 states with the lowest murder rates, only 11 of them even had it. Moreover, seeking death penalty is overall much more expensive than not seeking it. So overall, I think psychiatric centers will be a good transitionary thing, with sufficiently ethical treatments. But since we're talking about ill people, I think it's final time to get to our third and final chapter, and which is probably the reason why you even clicked on this video. So yeah, without any further ado, let's talk a little bit, not in details, but a little bit about transhumanism, baby! Okay, yeah, I know this might sound like a tangent, but hear me out. In Francophonic Marxist movements, there's this idea of liberté réelle going around, which could be literally translated as real freedom. It is mainly based on Marx's writing, especially earlier ones, where he talks about concepts of freedom. However, I'm not going to explain exactly Marx's ideas on this detail. Instead, I'll mainly focus on the way that the analytical Marxist and left libertarian philosopher and economist Philippe van Parijs defined the concept of real freedom, since I think it gives a much more insight and uses more contemporary terms. So I'd argue that Van Parijs's definition of real freedoms may be more relevant to this day, and I'll also explain how I think it works in practice, which may or may not be different from how Van Parijs and Marx see it. That's really hard to tell, but yeah, anyway. Beforehand, all you need to know is that Marx basically criticized what he viewed as bourgeois liberal freedom, and instead of completely antagonizing them as one would expect, he actually argues that we should expand on them. So first off, I'm gonna have to explain what negative and positive freedoms are. These notions were formalized by liberal thinkers such as Isaiah Berlin in the late 50s and early 60s, but it's frequently used to analyze anterior theories on freedoms, which Van Parijs also seems to do. negative freedoms are ones which people are not prevented or forced to do, hence simply acting on their own will. It's the kind of stuff you can find in the Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes, for example. However, one could retort that negative freedoms kinda lack something. For example, if one has the negative freedom of making a successful business, for example, most people don't have the resources to do this. There is too much randomness, which can make it basically impossible for people to truly do such a thing. If we want to ensure that everyone can do something, we must ensure that they have the capacity to act upon their own free will. This, for Isaiah Berlin, is what a positive freedom is, and to him it necessitates interference of other people for you to obtain these capacities and or sustain them. As Ron Replogle puts it in Recovering the Social Contract, positive freedoms basically imply a voluntary contract where each individual agrees to be interfered when they do something that would be counterproductive in their way to reach a particular freedom. Just like one would accept to be taken their keys away when they're drunk in order not to get an accident, and therefore sustaining their freedom to live in the positive sense. Hence, positive and negative freedoms are usually seen as antagonistic. Now that we get this, what are real freedoms then? Well, according to 𝗢𝗘𝗧𝗘𝗥, a freedom is considered as real if individuals aren't prevented from reaching these and also possess the resources or capacities to actually carry out their will. The or probably being inclusive in this case. So basically, these are negative freedoms with positive characteristics. The main common point with both real and positive freedoms is the capacity of each individual to carry out their will. However, even if within this common point, I'd say that real freedoms have a much more materialistically grounded basis, which is quite obvious since it comes from Marxist thoughts. In practice, I don't know how 𝗢𝗘𝗧𝗘𝗥 or Marx will have same things should turn out exactly, but I think I wouldn't be far from the point if I'm saying that real freedoms are ones that we have widely accessible resources at our hands to help us carry out those wills. These kind of things require us to collectivize, publicize, or anything of the sort as these resources. We could maybe even talk of, means of productions, perhaps. However, I like to propose a little extra to this notion. You see, the problem is that we could imagine people have the real liberty to walk, for example. However, there are people whose legs are paralyzed and cannot do this task, but they may still have the will to. And in that sense, although it's still a real freedom for this individual to walk, technically, they're still not forcefully able to. Sure, 𝗢𝗘𝗧𝗘𝗥 does acknowledge that no freedom can be 100% real, but that still shouldn't make it for me. I mean, that doesn't really make it. No. Obviously, one would really quickly think that, they can have wheelchairs, for example, or surgeries even. And that's basically the point I'm trying to make here. To me, real freedoms are, as theorized by Marxists in general, although I did focus on 𝗢𝗘𝗧𝗘𝗥 a lot, lack a fundamental thing that I think is required for one to be truly free. As a communist society, we should make tools that give people the ability to act as close as possible to their will. This obviously necessitates research and invention to thrive, and I did quickly explain in my first two videos a bunch of related things about it. and I'll probably talk about it some more because it's a very complicated subject. I think I'll need a whole video on the subject for that, maybe. I don't know. Nonetheless, it doesn't only suffice to have real freedoms. We also need to actively help our comrades by building tools that help them achieving their goals, and ever so closely as these tools become more and more sophisticated. And thus, I'm going to talk about why I fucking love transhumanism. Well, the problem is that, just like anarchism, there's basically as many forms of transhumanism as there are transhumanists. According to Humanity Plus, however, transhumanism has two main definitions, mainly basing themselves on Maxwell's ones. So, the intellectual and cultural movement that affirms the possibility and desirability of fundamentally improving the human condition through applied reason, especially by developing and making widely accessible technologies to eliminate aging and to greatly enhance intellectual, physical, and psychological capacities. It's also the study of the ramifications, promises, and potential dangers of technologies that will enable us to overcome fundamental human limitations, and the related study of the ethical matters involved in developing and using such technologies. In the former sense, I would argue that transhumanism not only argues that we could reach more real freedoms with the widely accessible use and development of technologies, but it actually expands on it by allowing us to reach closer or even improved experiences in spite of mental or physical restrictions. Moreover, the latter meaning, describing a sort of futurological yet material study of such technologies, kind of reminds me of dialectical materialism, minus all the weird Hegelian shit, obviously. So, well, basically scientific methodology. Yeah, I could have just say that one at first, but hey, just goes to show how much there is an overlap between Marxism and transhumanism, you know? And the thing is, I'm not even Marxist, I'm just saying that, hey, you know, they can be eerily similar sometimes. But also, transhumanism is much more blurry than one could think. See, Humanity Plus's definition only talks about using technologies, but in and of itself, it's a very wide term, and it doesn't have to be about cybernetics and shit like that, you know. When my friend Chaz had to go to technology classes from 6th to 9th grade, we barely even talked about robotics, cybernetics, or whatever. Nah, our main focus was on bridges, houses, and shit. And honestly, if you take Humanity Plus's definition to the fucking letter, you could even argue that housing homeless people is a form of transhumanism, since we're actively making widely accessible technologies, or buildings in that case, to greatly enhance their living standards so that they have more time to focus on stuff they actually like to do without having to worry about having a place to sleep for the night or not, hence allowing them to use their precious time in more meaningful ways. And yes, if they want to read some shit, do physical exercise, get therapy and stuff like that in this extra time, then they're actually enhancing their intellectual, physical again, what the fuck is wrong with me, and psychological capacities. Maybe one will be less baffled if I was talking about free healthcare for all instead, as it will make the use of surgical technologies, for example, more widely accessible for all to enjoy, and allowing people to live longer and having more time to do stuff they like without having to worry about getting in debt and shit like that. However, maybe you feel a bit more baffled by the use of transhumanism in the former example rather than the latter, because it doesn't strictly benefit everyone, just the poorest people. What I'm saying is that you probably have some internalized classes, I'm just saying. But yeah, I mean, it's okay. Everyone has that to some extent. I think it's just important to expose this kind of bias so that we are on the same page, you know? Okay, so here's some common misconceptions about transhumanism. The first one is, isn't it just human enhancement? Well, obviously though, I'm coming from an anarchist angle on that subject, but there's a lot of movements coming from a lot of sometimes antithetic angles. For example, there is one very, very mainstream branch, which I usually, although quite amusingly, describe as Silicon Valley transhumanism. You can put the humanism under quotes, which usually only focuses on the development of such technologies, and usually doesn't really give a shit about, well, the accessibility, or only in the sheets, at the very least, since it doesn't really go along very well with libertarian capitalist incentives. Some even just reduce transhumanism to, well, human enhancement, which, although heavily related, is still a whole of a deal, and I find it kind of reductive. Human enhancement just means the alteration of the human body to enhance one's capacities through any means necessary, and not forcefully technological ones, per se, even if it's the usual meaning we call to it, especially when we're talking about transhumanism at the same time. So sure, transhumanism builds a bit upon it, but in a very specific manner. Using transhumanism and human enhancement interchangeably is incredibly reductive, especially considering all the things that transhumanism adds to human enhancement ideas, which are specifically there to avoid problematic ideas which can emerge from the latter. I'd say the blurry line between transhumanism and human enhancement is mainly there because of these capitalistic transhumanists, quote unquote, who co-opted that word for their own sake, a bit like authors did for libertarian, for example. Some concerns about transhumanism can arise from the proximity it kind of has with another really controversial ideology, which is eugenism. So to get things right off the bat, I am vehemently against authoritarian eugenism. However, this isn't the only form it can take. There's that thing called new eugenics, which builds upon human enhancement using reproductive technologies and human genetic engineering. Holy shit, sorry. Once again, this is a bit different from transhumanism, mainly because it doesn't specifically advocate for the accessibility of such things, but if one were to add wide accessibility of such reproductive technologies, then we will technically indeed be able to talk about a specific branch of new eugenics, which is also a branch of transhumanist philosophy. But like all branches, most transhumanists don't forcefully agree with that. In my opinion, which obviously you can do whatever the fuck you want with, taking decisions for one's own baby without their consent is kind of fucked up if it's something that cannot be reverted later in their lives, or if the baby's or the pregnant parent's life isn't in danger, or if the mother isn't physically or psychologically in danger, or at least if the pregnancy comes to terms, obviously. Abortion is all fine and dandy, right? Don't worry, I'm far from being anti-choice. I just think there are ethical problems if you intend to actually let them become an independent adult, being like an individual adult being in the foreseeable future. But otherwise, yeah, if you want to abort, I guess that's completely fine. And no one to judge you, even if you do stuff like that. What about ableism? Well, If anything, we should couple transhumanism with drastic changes in the society on how we perceive disabilities. And there are many ways to deal with a lot of things we consider as disabilities, which don't even involve technologies at all, as if anything else, like, you know, you could involve technologies, right? But only as, you know, temporary solutions as well. For example, I'm fairly certain, at like 99%, if not more, that I'm probably some sort of neurotypical, probably Asperger's or ADHD, maybe even both. But honestly, if we stopped expecting so much things from people, I doubt we would even be considered I doubt that we would even consider these Asperger's and ADHD and stuff like that as disorders or as disabilities. See, disabilities are actually very much contextual, sorry, and it's not even a conspiracy or anything to say that. It's just a very well-known fact. Normality is a dominant, shared expectation of behavior and personal characteristics that defines what is considered culturally desirable and appropriate. Still, to get back to transhumanism itself, though, people who would want to experience things that they are unable to directly do should be able to get widely accessible technologies and stay informed on recent technological developments, which would help them to get ever so closer to reaching their will, eventually even so closely that any difference with the actual experience itself will just be rude nitpicking. For example, imagine that we give ever so realistic prostheses to people whose legs are paralyzed. I don't know what I have with paralyzed legs. And these prostheses will be so advanced technologically that they can move, they can move according to neuronal electric impulses, just like one would with actual legs, organic legs. Would you really fucking nitpick and go like, but if they don't really walk because their legs are artificial and shit? Come on, let's be honest here. They're literally walking. Shut up, straw man. But hopefully you'll see why this analogy is relevant when you talk about subjects like these in your day-to-day life. And there is no threshold, there is no point below which, there's no technological progress point below which we can't talk about, they can't walk because that or that. And afterwards, it's like, oh yes, they definitely can walk, actually. This approach of transhumanism, in which we conjoin efforts on both technological and social progress at the same time to solve this kind of problem, is what we usually call techno-progressivism. And I don't usually revendicated myself as such, but I definitely am a techno-progressive. As you can see, transhumanism basically takes our current limitations and throws them in the fucking trash. Hopefully you can see why, just from that alone, transhumanism fits pretty nicely with and along constructivist ideas. So yeah, basically, it literally fucking takes essentialism and ducks it away. That's so beautiful. It questions human nature, human limitations, essences, etc. If anything, transhumanism is probably the greatest enemy of essentialism, even more than just constructivism itself. And I think that just for that alone, it should be worth considering. So, to keep talking about the wide diversity in transhumanist philosophy, I think I'll attempt to explain some of its main branches. I'm going to start with the weirdest one, although it's kind of based, which is Extropianism. Wikipedia summarizes it as the idea that advances in science and technology will someday let people live indefinitely. I mean, good enough, but that's a bit reductive, and it kind of sounds synonymous with immortalism, which I'll talk about a little bit and a bit more thoroughly later, in just a bit. X. Moore, a very influential author, and I guess you remember him from the 2 definitions of transhumanism from earlier, summarizes Extropianism with 7 main points, which I'll just cut myself from reading. The first point is perpetual progress. Extropy means seeking more intelligence, wisdom, and effectiveness, an open-ended lifespan, and the removal of political, cultural, biological, and psychological limits to continuing development. Perpetually overcoming constraints on our progress and possibilities as individuals, as organizations, and as a species. Growing in healthy directions without power. The second point is self-transformation. Extropy means affirming continual ethical, intellectual, and physical self-improvement through critical and creative thinking, perpetual learning, personal responsibility, proactivity, and experimentation. Using technology in the widest sense to seek physiological and neurological augmentation, along with emotional and psychological refinement. Practical optimism. Extropy means fueling action with positive expectations, individuals and organizations being tirelessly proactive. Adopting rational, action-based optimism or proaction in place of blind faith and stagnant pessimism. The fourth point is intelligent technology. Extropy means designing and managing technologies not as ends in themselves, but as effective means for improving life. Applying science and technology creatively and courageously to transcend natural, quote unquote, but harmful, confining qualities derived from our biological heritage, culture, and environment. The fifth point is open society, information and democracy. Extropy means supporting social orders that foster freedom of communication, freedom of action, experimentation, and innovation, questioning, and learning. Opposing authoritarian social control and unnecessary hierarchy, and favoring the rule of law and decentralization of power and responsibility. Preferring bargaining over battling, exchange over extortion, and communication over compulsion. Openness to improvement rather than static utopia. Extropia, aka ever receding stretch goals for society, over utopia, which is no place. Sixth, self-direction. Extropy means valuing independent thinking, individual freedom, personal responsibility, self-direction, self-respect, and a parallel respect for others. Rational thinking. Extropy means favoring reason over blind faith and questioning over dogma. It means understanding, experimenting, learning, challenging, and innovating rather than clinging to beliefs. Honestly, all of these points, from all of these points, I would say that extropianism is pretty pogus if you ask me. But it can definitely be improved overall. Yeah, it has a lot of individualism and this kind of stuff, even though there's stuff about decentralization, democracy, stuff like that. But I still feel like there is a bit too much emphasis towards personal responsibility and stuff like that, and individualism. So yeah, there's definitely improvement to be made. And you know what? That's exactly what some people did at some point. One derivative movement of the sort is Extropism, which has been described in the Extropian manifesto with only 5 main principles, but I'm not gonna I'm not gonna detail as much as I did for the other one. So, first point is endless extension. The second one is transcending restriction. Sorry, I forgot to put this one. The third is overcoming property. The fourth is intelligence. And the fifth is smart machines. And yes, you heard that third point right. Overcoming property. We wish to reform archaic and outdated human laws that govern possession by improving and or annihilating terms such as ownership, copyright, patent, money, and property. We believe that present regulations promote greed and are ultimately destructive to a far larger degree than they are beneficial. Seriously, transhumanism and anarcho-communism have such a fucking overlap that's just ridiculous at this point. I guess most people who ever remotely heard about transhumanism are aware of this idea of a technological singularity. However, Singularitarianism isn't just the idea that such a thing is bound to exist. I mean, it obviously will. But the idea of Singularitarianism is that we should do everything to ensure it will be beneficial for humanity. Like, basically, they don't just agree it will open, they also think it's desirable, you know. Or we should make it desirable, at least. On my end, I'm pretty much neutral about it. I'd say we should just ensure that it's not gonna fucking kill us all, or whatever. But I'm not too worried on that part. I wouldn't want them either to force us to do things, because it thinks they'd be beneficial for whole humanity to do, obviously. I'm just okay if they just, vibe, just like basically any other individual. And I'll probably talk about, robot rights and stuff like that in a future video, because it's not exactly transhumanism related, but kind of. Okay. So, Immortalist transhumanism seeks to basically eliminate death. Pretty fucking ambitious, I know. One of the absolute worst illnesses in this fucking world, according to us, is senescence. Because of this shit, 100% of people have it, and 100% of people who have it die at some point. And if not for anything else, senescence ensures that everyone dies at some point. Pretty fucked up if you ask me. That's a major health crisis we have ever since life even exists on this damn planet. However, I'd like to point out that the anti-aging movement in and of itself suffered a bit from the presence of pseudo-scientist hacks who attempted to use that idea to promote their shitty products, and I still keep quite a critical eye on the movement in and of itself, and so should you. This movement is quite close to the abolitionist current of transhumanism, which advocates for no less than the abolition of pain and suffering for all sentient beings. Obviously, if you're anti-speciesist, I'd absolutely love to hear about ways to generalize that to all living beings in an ethical matter. So yeah. Let's end with, let's end all that chapter with a bit of trans rights, shall we? We postgenderists consider that gender is arbitrary, unnecessary, and too limiting, and that the progressive erosion of the gender binary will be pretty much liberatory. I know I just paraphrased Wikipedia here, but honestly, what else can I say? As technology progresses, including surgeries and stuff alike, our reproductive organs could be switched more and more efficiently, and less risks will be taken. So at some point, gender distinctions will just become completely obsolete and arbitrary. And because of that, gender will probably gradually cease to be a relevant thing, and we'll all basically become agender by default. I have quite a liking for that idea as an agenda person who also believes in gender abolitionism. I know that term is a bit connoted with TERFs, but don't worry, I don't use it as a TERF, obviously. I mean, I'm fucking trans, so. But yeah, postgenderism just has the idea that because of technological progress, not only genders will cease to be relevant, but technically, biological differences between sexes, and not just genders, but transphobes love to, you know, confuse both, and that's for people kind of care as well, so it's still a bit relevant to the discussion, will gradually cease to be relevant as well, hence adding like the last nail in the coffin of gender. So I'm far from having covered all of the different movements, but I think it's good enough as is. Since I just intended this part to be an introduction to transhumanism with a sort of anarcho-communist approach. And that's also probably the only such video on YouTube like that. Oh, well, shit, never mind. Overall, transhumanism will be a net benefit in communist and all anarchist movements, providing us with a lot of foods for thought, and like a lot of food for thought in our future, and the use of technologies to reach our goals, and a way to prepare ourselves for future technological progress and use them in ways which both ensure more ethically desirable and beneficial outcomes for the greater of all sentient beings. Yes, I know you would love to hear about what I have to say, or what we have to say, or, you know, what's the matter about robot rights, automation, and stuff like that. But I think I'll talk about these in another video, because, once again, it's not really the subject of transhumanism. It's, even if tangentially related, and I'll probably mention transhumanism multiple times throughout that video, but I still think it's very much distinct, and being, once again, this video is an introduction, and it's also really way too fucking long, and I already had a hard time writing since like the last 3 months with all the exams and shit. But yeah, anyway, I'm fucking glad I'm fucking done with this video now. Until next time, have a good praxis, my comrades. See ya. Holy fucking shit.